Hello, happy Friday, everybody. My name is Fazana Badjual, and welcome to the Week Unspun, a weekly live look at the world through the eyes of PR pros around the world. My name is Fazana, and I am in London.
I'm David Gallagher, and I am in Austin, Texas.
And I'm Doug Downs in Canada's Rocky Mountains.
Did you forget where you are, Doug?
Did I which?
Did you forget where you are?
No, not at all.
So our attention will be on the events that have been happening in the snowy town of Davos, the reports. We're going to be looking at the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is the sort of, the main report for our industry. And of course, we're looking at the possibility of the forum moving from Davos to other locations. And please feel free to leave your comments and we'll try and address them before the end of the show. And we will begin with the speech that cut through by the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and we want a response from our resident Canadian. Over to you, Doug.
That, eh? How about a Canadian stepping up and stealing the show? And it's not about hockey. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney absolutely stole the room at Davos this past week. It's a speech that didn't just land well. He earned a standing ovation in the room and a wave of praise across the globe. Even Australia picked it up fast. Treasurer Jim Chalmers, calling it a stunning speech, said they're now sharing it and talking about it inside the Australian government. That's what we need. And it's easy to see why this worked. Carney gave the world a few lines built to replay. We're in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. And the warning that really stuck with a lot of people, clip that clicked. If we're not at the table, we're on the menu. Remember that recipe, kids. Stories, statistics, and sound bites. That's what works in a speech. It was so perfect. The only reply from President Trump was, well, you can't be on our board of peace now. Back at home, critics are already saying great words, prove it. I mean, eventually in comms, it's not about how you make people think, and it's not entirely about how you make people feel. It's what you make people do. That is the measurement for comms, and Canadians have withstood this from Mark Carney, where there's a lot of talk and we just don't see the action, but still a great speech. Here's a little bit of cold water. The speech itself, not really picked up by folks like Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron. They've been critical of Trump for sure. It's Australia and Mexico that are picking up on this idea. And here's the problem for me. Carney isn't actually offering to lead anything. He's calling for decentralized coalitions. So is this a real plan? A leaderless effort where everybody agrees, nobody moves? Another great speech that simply becomes academic theater? For me, Farzana, that's the risk. For me, words don't change the world. They might be a beginning, but they don't change things. Action does.
Doug, how could you say that? We are storytellers. My God, you'll put us out of business. No, words do change the world, and they have. Now, I think you raise a really valid point, because often people think of, a piece of content, or be it a speech or a post, or a report as, how it landed, in terms of impressions and reach and sentiment. Was it all positive? But actually, you have to always dial your way back to not these sort of vanity sort of metrics, but actually, what is the purpose? The person who actually pushed out that piece of communication. So, Carney in this instance, what is he trying to achieve? And so, some people say that, oh, maybe his speech backfired because he's no longer on the board of peace. But, was that something that he was looking to be on? Or was he aware of what the risks and the implications of his speech? So I think it's always important when you analyze communications is you don't look at it from your lens or vanity metrics. You look at it from the person who is actually pushing that piece of content out. What is their strategic aim? And I think when you roll it back, I think, it cut through. It has made him look like a leader with purpose, a leader that is actually stepping up and in also getting sort of cut through and respect from some people who are waiting for a leader to stand up to President Trump. Now, what I thought was quite interesting is actually how other leaders have come across, because of course, like we all know in PR, be careful about what you put on your messages, because you never know when they're going to be leaked. And, the former sort of diplomatic channels and diplomatic decorum no longer exists in this age, as we can see from President Trump, who started to release messages that he was getting from other leaders.
I saw that. He just sort of held up his phone here and said, here's images from it.
Well, here you go. I mean, here's one from obviously, President Macron. And it's like, and doing what a good Frenchman should do. They've got brilliant food and wine to tempt him to come in with. So I think that, I think the PR story here is, you cannot assume that people will hold your messages private anymore, because over here, look at Mark Rush. I mean, this is incredibly embarrassing. The sort of can't wait to see you. What you've accomplished in Syria today is incredible. It does come across as quite sycophantic, and so of course, Mark probably thought, well, this will never get in the public domain, so I can play this sort of dual game of sort of sweetening up my sort of language with President Trump, but then appearing quite leadership like with my other stakeholders. But it's so important to bear in mind that a message that is intended for one audience, here President Trump, can quite easily leak into the public domain and therefore have a big impact and bring in sort of some dissonance in the way that you're perceived. But yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I concur. I thought it was a home run. I really do, in terms of being quotable, memorable, seizing the moment. I really think people were eager, almost desperate, for there to be some sort of counter message to really what we heard from President Trump. So I thought in the moment, I thought it was exactly what was required. I think in terms of what's being replayed, it's interesting. And I look at this, as we all do from a PR perspective. We tend to think of speeches as a set piece, 15 or 20 minute script, and we think about its entire structure. But really, there's about 17 seconds that people are sharing and repeating and remembering, and you kind of quoted that either you're on the table or you're either at the table or on the table, Doug. So I think it was a home run. To your bigger point, I do think actions start with words. You got to start somewhere, and I will predict that we're talking about this willing of the middle coalition long after we're talking about the Board of Peace. I think this could be the beginning of an interesting realignment of geopolitical powers, and that might be why Starmer or Macron or others didn't jump on it, because they're happy members of the G7 right now. They may not. They probably were caught a little ill prepared, but I think there may be a little bit of discord there. And sharing private WhatsApp messages, that's just crazy. I don't understand that. Sorry, here's a comment from Georg. There are two types of conversations at Davos. Some of you don't know Georg. He worked for the forum for many years. We're former colleagues, and I think he's on the ground right now. There are two types of conversations at Davos: the ones with Americans in the room and the ones without Americans in the room. I think that's really pretty insightful. So things are changing, and Carney is one of the voices giving license and direction to the change.
And it could be from Georg, from your comment, maybe things are happening behind the scenes, and that's great. Terrific speech. My point is, got to see follow-up. And as Canadians, we've gone through about 12 years of blah, blah, blah at the top and not a lot of do. So we're gun shy about great words.
There's a nice comment about my mustache. I assume it's my mustache, but we don't have to pull that out. Could be yours. But keep those comments. It was from me. Keep those comments going. Hey, I know the whole show is pretty much about Davos. Just one insight. Sitting here in traffic, listening to the radio, the real world isn't paying as much attention to Davos as we might be. Even on NPR, it's a story, but it's not the only story. I just think that's interesting, because I know we've been hyper fixated on it, including, and Farzana, you alluded to this, the annual release of the Edelman Trust Barometer comes out every year. It's their look at where people are placing their institutional trust, whether it's companies, charities, governments, even religious sources. And I'll come to the findings. But what was interesting to me this year is literally I was kind of waiting for it to come out. I think it's a great piece of thought leadership. A trade journalist, one we all know and respect, texted me and he said, "Why do PR people hate the Edelman Trust Barometer so much?" And it really sort of took me by surprise. But I have heard a lot of complaining about the Trust Barometer. I suspect it's mostly built on jealousy. It is the most quoted piece of research in our industry. every year. Now, maybe that's, some people would say that doesn't speak well of it at all, but it is the most widely quoted source of research. And I think it is on an annual basis sort of a good barometer, as the title suggests, on where public sentiment is. This year, the message was sobering, maybe a statement of the obvious, but worth repeating. In their words, public trust is becoming more local, more conditional, and more fragmented. I just want to share a couple of comments from about the report itself and get your take, and you might have slightly different views. Richard Edelman CEO, warned that there's no such thing as business as usual. And he says that as confidence erodes in international business, domestic businesses must be the source of trust and confidence for people. IBM's Arvind Krishna goes a step further. He basically says the international business model is dead. I don't know if that's in the actual research, but that was his take. And then a critic, and this, as I say, this report always gets at least as much criticism as it does support. There's a clinical professor of business at NYU, Allison Taylor. I have huge respect for her, but she's not a fan of this instrument in particular. Paraphrasing, semi-quoting, she says, "It sure sounds like meaningless waffle, given that employers are laying people off like crazy, failing to stand up to government, galloping into surveillance, abandoning responsibility. Maybe we should take a little bit of take a deeper look into these dynamics," with the question mark. So, Doug, we chatted a little bit about this earlier in the week. You're not a PR person who hates the barometer. What's your take on the barometer? Do you think it stood out this year? Give me a quick take, and then we'll come to you, Farzana, if you don't mind. Oh, Doug, you're muted and frozen.
Sorry, I'm muting my mic. You know, I'm muting because I'm coughing off mic, and I just forgot to turn it back on. I've always loved the trust barometer, and I find it ironic that it suffers from a lack of trust amongst some. But anyway, the trust barometer has always put into context for me, I think in the last couple of decades, that the person people trust is someone just like them, right? I trust someone just like me. And that's always been number one. And I've always taken that to heart in any plan that I've built. If other studies have been saying exactly that, they don't say it as clearly, they don't say it as well, and they don't get that message out. And I still think a lot of PR folks miss that. I thought Edelman stood up and told us kind of what we already know in our bones. He called it the era of insularity, cold name for a cold reality. The world has grown small, and we no longer trust the person across the sea or even the person across the street unless they're just like us, right? Edelman spoke of polynational models. To me, this is just a fancy way of saying the big shared world is dead. We are retreaters now. We're building digital fortresses, huddling in the niches that we self-identify in, that the mass audience has splintered like dry wood. And I admire the clarity of the Edelman Trust Barometer. Edelman measures the rot with a steady hand, and then it calls it a metric. He's telling the elites that their global stage has been broken into 1,000 private rooms. It's an obvious truth to me, but a truth that needs to be said out loud in the mountain air. David, for me, Edelman isn't just tracking a trend. He's performing an autopsy on the idea of the common world. That's why I love it.
Autopsy is a strong word. Farzana, I think you tell me, what do you think?
Well, I want to lean into Anne-Marie's comment, actually. So, Anne-Marie's come in very sort of, no nonsense. It is what it is. And it doesn't pretend to be academically rigorous. And it's a good example of content. We're all talking about it. And I'm sure that's, that's important for them as, their primary audience are clients in the PR industry. And, she does like reading counterpoints because it reminds us to exercise our critical thinking, which is exactly what I agree. So when I read a report, I want to also read the critique from others so that, one can understand it with more nuance. And so I do like what Anne-Marie has to say. I mean, my thoughts are, is it rocket science that we are increasingly, distrusting sort of more sort of far away institutions? I think close proximity has always had a relationship with trust. And I don't think that's anything new. I think what's happening is perhaps Western sort of corporates no longer have that sort of immediate trust in sort of emerging and frontier markets that they used to, because I think we're sort of moving from this sort of, unipolar to multipolar. And so therefore, I think people are demanding leadership and conversation and branding and marketing and comms that is aligned to their culture. I think people are looking for authenticity from their own lens. And I think also deference is dead. And so that's why people just aren't interested so much in leadership or the biggest company in the world, or or whatever. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing is a breakdown of trust, because people want to want to sort of listen and tune into perspectives from people who look like them and who are from their region. And maybe we're all becoming a bit tribal.
Does it, David, let me put you on the spot. Is this the shot across the bow for the concept of globalism?
Well, I was thinking about listening to Farzana and reading Anne-Marie's comment. In some ways, Davos, the World Economic Forum, was kind of the cradle of globalization, or at least it shined a spotlight on this idea that we were living, in a flat world, to quote Thomas Friedman. I think he spoke about this at Davos, a decade or so ago. So I do think it signals that maybe the world wasn't as flat as we thought, that it was a little more fragmented than we believe. I don't know if anything has fundamentally changed, or if just we're paying attention more closely than we used to. But again, I find it to be a useful piece of provocative thought leadership, and I applaud the Edelman team for it. I can also understand those who are looking at it from a more rigorous academic perspective about how it could be improved. But I'm glad that it's out, and I think we'll be talking about it for weeks and throughout the year. Maybe if we step a little bit just for a moment outside of Davos, I did pay attention to your show this week. For those who don't know, Doug and Farzana hosted a different show called Stories and Strategies. It's a look at more evergreen issues. And this week you had Roger Cairn, I think was his name. I thought it was Nairn. Sorry, I thought it was a great episode. I happened to listen to it on a long walk, and I was thinking about this show and about Davos, and I thought it put into perspective some of these things, a little more narrowly from people who aren't necessarily dealing with geopolitical issues. But this idea of trying to look at storytelling that works on a human level. And I just didn't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about that, if you had anything to show from
we do have a clip, but I'm afraid after the clip, I'm going to take you back to Davos for another story. But now, I think we had this lovely guest who is a podcast expert and called Roger Nairn, and he gave an incredible insight in the power of podcasts and why it is in such a huge, impressive growth trajectory, and especially in this sort of attention deficit sort of world that we're living in. So yeah, let's roll a clip.
Fails at this because it starts with context, mission, background, which is a sort of a polite way of saying please wait while we warm up this conversation, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the shows that hold attention, pick one clear idea, build tension around it, and then let the listener feel the people behind the message or behind the story. So in PR, one of the hidden superpowers about PR is clarity, right? Because clarity beats clever, where when attention is quite scarce.
And that's such a good point, Farzana, and going back to Davos, that's something I thought Mark Carney accomplished that. I thought Richard Edelman, and maybe that's why the Edelman Trust Barometer has done so well, despite what some academics think is a lack of displayed rigor at the very least. And if you can do better, do it. But also Larry Fink, the from Blackstone, I thought provided some clarity in his own way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just going back to sort of Edelman Barometer is, again, the academics who are sort of screaming blue murder against the lack of rigor in their approach, one has to ask themselves, Edelman, are they targeting the academics? Is it their sort of main stakeholder that they are looking to influence, to persuade? No. And I think we always need to be mindful about who is the target audience for a strategic communications play. And I think we forget that. We always assume that, our opinion matters when actually we may not be the target audience. Now, moving on, well, actually not moving on, staying firmly in the Davos playpen. Interesting, I sort of picked up Larry Fink, the co-chair of the World Economic Forum, and of course the CEO of BlackRock. He mooted the idea of moving Davos to another location. And I think they're toying with the idea of Dublin. They're toying with the, with the idea of Detroit. So, very much staying within the D category. So, of course, as PRs, we approve because we believe in alliteration. Now, he believes the event has outgrown its current venue, largely because of the sheer number of delegates that are attending. And of course, there are two types of delegates. You've got the white badge holders, the sort of, the halo delegates, the ones, who get in. But then, and they're roughly about 3,000, I think, official participants. And then you've got a massive 15,000 plus, apparently, sort of unofficial attendees, just dwarf the 3,000 official. And so, of course, they're thinking of moving. And but of course, the problem from a brand perspective is actually the World Economic Forum is often sort of the term is sort of interchangeable with Davos, and most people use Davos. They don't use World Economic Forum or WEF. The acronym doesn't really flow, or WEF. And so what's going to happen if you end? Is it going to be the World Economic Forum or WEF in Dublin or Detroit, or is it going to be weirdly Davos in Detroit? And so there is a bit of a branding challenge if the forum moves. And of course, what lucky city is going to get the World Economic Forum? Because think of all of the economic benefits of the sort of the tourism, the travel, hospitality, etc. Not to mention all of the media attention and the senior leaders that come in who are capable of consequential decisions. And of course, that means that the sleepy little town of Davos, I mean, what it's become, that could, other city-states must be salivating thinking about it, and no doubt thinking about offering some eye-watering incentives to attract it. And that's why you have other platforms such as the World Cup, and why countries around the world just clamor, spend enormous amounts of money, because there's huge value to hosting these. And it's, a lot of it sort of money can't buy. And I wanted to sort of lean into you, David. Now, if they move the forum from Davos to somewhere like Detroit or Dublin, what do you think would be the sort of the major challenges in terms of the brand? Because it is known as Davos, we call it Davos. And of course, you have advised the World Economic Forum in the past in terms of brand. So tell us a little bit about your perspective there.
Well, advice might be a strong word. I did work with them on a project a while ago, kind of my first introduction to the forum, and really kind of to tackle that exact question. How do they associate and build the brand of the World Economic Forum, which is the actual name of the organization, to its annual meeting, which is almost always held in Davos? I think there's been a couple of exceptions. They also have what they call Summer Davos, which has been historically held in two different places in China. But definitely the brand value has been attached to this location. And I think they've struggled with this for years, about how to acknowledge that that's how they're considered, but also the fact that they work on a year-long basis. They do a lot of things that don't have anything to do with Davos, and they've got value that transcends this one conversation. So I think it's a legitimate question to ask. And it's been on their minds, I think, for a long time. But it kind of interesting leans into a couple of other things. Is this a lean into populism? Is this a step away from charges of elitism, which is something that the forum has struggled to address, or tried to address over the years as well? So is this a way of opening up the forum and bringing its considerations, its deliberations, the spotlight into other markets? As you know, I'm a big fan of the forum overall. I think they have instigated a lot of important conversations. I think they shine a light on the issues that we need to be looking at. And I think that the brand, like all brands, probably is due for at least a reconsideration. And this would be one thing, at least, that you look at. I haven't seen what the reaction is yet, but I think it's a legitimate question to ask, even if it's one they decide not to pursue right now. Doug, what's your take?
Yeah, so same lines. Davos was always more an idea, right, David, more than a location. And neutral Switzerland was the chosen location, understanding that there's different ideas, different cultural philosophies that come with the idea of uniting a world. But the challenge in 2026 is we don't assemble by appointment anymore, or really by place anymore, right? Case in point, Netanyahu and Putin couldn't go, right, for fear allegedly of being arrested at the airport. So I thought Larry Fink spoke well. He spoke like a man who knows the weather is changing. He didn't hide behind the old Davos jargon. He talked about failure. He called the forum an echo chamber. And I didn't take it as humility from him. I took it as a kind of strategic, tactical retreat. He sees the populist tide rising, and he's trying to build a breakwater, if you will. He talks about Detroit, you're right, but he also talked about Jakarta, so he's willing to break the D alliteration. And he wants to put on a work shirt, and he wants to stand where things are built. Doesn't seem to want to do the work, but he wants to stand where the things are built, and he's trying to wash the mountain air off the money. He knows that if the elite don't admit that they are out of step, the world will simply stop listening. Fink is not seeking an apology for the global elite. He's seeking an insurance policy for their relevance. He's not changing the game. He's changing his jersey so he can keep playing. And in terms of should Davos move, maybe there's a hybrid model here. And I didn't realize they already sort of had one with Davos Summer as brought to you from China. But maybe there's a hybrid model they can start to identify, Farzana, that would work for them.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for bringing it to our attention. And I'm sorry I took us prematurely to the podcast. It just popped into my mind. I thought I would raise it while it was fresh on.
I'm glad it's top of mind. That's where it should be. But I think we're getting close to the end. Any other comments that we got that we wanted to highlight that came in through the course of the live stream? We had a few good comments today.
I think there's a lot of comments on your moustache. So I think facial hair seems
David's. Right? Yeah. Not mine. Yeah.
It's all part of the brand. Just one last thing before you read us out, Doug, and I alluded to this earlier, just in terms of how news is reviewed. And I've had an opportunity to I'm sitting in my dad's house. He's a regular person. He's a normal human. He's not a professional communicator like us. And I see him literally scrolling on his iPad, usually through videos, short form. Loud and bright are the ones that get people to stop. And it's not just my dad. And they usually get no further than 20 seconds in at the max before they move on to the next one. And something's got to be pretty attention grabbing to pause and read through it. And it was just a wake up for me that we take things in parts and analyze them in full and assume that contributes to a wider understanding. I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but it's just how we've been trained to do it. And I'm not sure that's how people actually experience the news of the world. And I saw that play out over and over as we were closely watching what was happening in Davos. That's not the way most people were experiencing it. And I think their views are probably more important than ours, when it comes to understanding how the public's responding.
Last year, I was at an event, got to hang out with some of the big production folks from big production companies in LA. And there are people who they make their living building 2 YouTube thumbnails in a day. That's their entire thumbnail. The image you see before you click, they spend 4 hours per thumbnail. That's their job, right? Big, bright, and that's the whole psychology of what earns us from 0 seconds to 1 second and gets us to click. So, okay, we got to click out. So as always, thanks to our superstar producers. They're amazing. Emily Page and Solomon eBay. They're so great. Just ask them. The Week Unspun is a co-production of Curzon Public Relations, Stories and Strategies podcasts, and Fullgate Advisors. Recordings on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Give them a listen. And our final thought for this week, an African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Have a great weekend.